Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Bronson, the Budget Commander.
And I am Zach, the Value Commander, and we are the
Bargain
Bin Commanders.
So today, guys, we are looking at Kess, the Dissident Mage. Now, this commander is really awesome because we are going to be doing a Kess Storm.
But Bronson, I didn't think you could do Storm in Commander.
Turns out you can. All you have to do is throw enough spells at the problem and then win the game.
You know, I'm really intrigued to see this. So guys, we're going to look at Kess under the microscope, just like we do every deck on this channel, see how it does in different stages of the game, and what it does in between.
Yep, we're going to be looking at it just like we do every other deck, looking at it in the early game, the mid game, the late game.
How it's going to recover after any kind of disruption or board wipes.
Also, what it does in case of aggro, how it controls the game out, and ultimately what its win cons are.
So, Bronson, what do you think this deck, the premise of this deck is?
Oh, it's really easy. It's a Spellslinger's deck. The number of creatures in this deck is super minimal.
So, would you say this is a control deck?
This is a counter burn deck.
So guys, if you guys like what we're doing today, and like the decks that we're showing on this channel, go ahead and hit like and subscribe, and make sure you ring that bell so we can all draw cards, okay?
Yep, and without further ado, we're going to see you in the bargain bin.
All right, gentlemen, I want you to repeat after me just how I do it. Ready?
Alrighty, so today we are looking at Kess, the Dissident Mage. So, Kess is a really awesome commander you can utilize. She is a 4-drop commander, 1 colorless, 1 red, 1 black, and 1 blue. She has flying, and she is a 3/4 body, but what really matters for this build is her ability. During each of your turns, you may cast an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. If a card cast this way would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So pretty much what that means is Kess is going to give all of the instants and sorceries in our deck a little bit of flashback without having to pay the extra flashback costs.
That is a lot of value, because a lot of times those flashback cards are a higher cost than what the original CMC is, right?
It is. Like, you take Faithless Looting, for instance. You have a 1-drop to cast it, but to flash it back, you have to pay 3.
So that's just a lot of value, especially on a body that you have on the field that you can constantly keep recurring because she is your commander.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what kind of lands are we looking at to kind of fuel this fire that you call Storm?
Well, first off, speaking of fire, we have 5, count them, 5 of our mountains. All right. So these are some awesome way to get going. And next we have 6 islands to keep going as well, because we are playing counter control as well as Storm. So with our 6 islands and our 5 mountains, then we're going to finish it off with only 4 swamps for our basic lands.
Okay, so it looks like you're running about 15 basic lands in total. Obviously, that's not all of your land base. What other kind of lands we're looking at to kind of help your color splicing and your balance with those lands?
Well, we have a lot of awesome cards to utilize to help with land splicing. First off, we are running one of my favorite lands in the game, Command Tower.
That's really a commander staple, right?
It is. If you're playing commander and you're running anything that's not monocolored, Command Tower is going to be very important to put in every deck.
Well, even Command Tower in a monocolored deck, I mean, it's something at least. Even
It is, but it does get shut down by the cards that kill off any non-basic land.
Yes, you are right.
So the next one we're going to be looking at is Crumbling Necropolis. This is one of the tri-lands. It comes in tapped, but whenever you tap it, you can add a blue, black, or red to your mana pool. It's a fantastic way to get moving in these Grixis colors.
Isn't that kind of, at least in this deck, kind of just a slower Command Tower because it's coming in tapped?
It is a little bit of a slower Command Tower, but it does have that value.
Yes, it does.
So next, we're going to be looking at some fetch lands. All right. We have 2 lands. Now, they have different names, but they are the same thing. We have Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds. So, how it works, they come into the field, you tap them, you sack them, you search your library for a basic land card, they come onto the battlefield tapped, and you shuffle your library.
Yeah, that's a lot of value, especially being able to color fix for whatever's in your hand at that time.
Oh, yeah. Now, next we have another fetch land, but this one's got a little bit of value to it. We have Grixis Panorama. How it works is you can tap it and add colorless to your mana pool, or You can pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice Grixis Panorama, search your library for a basic island, swamp, or mountain card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library.
Okay, so it's just like those other fetch lands, but it does have that colorless value in case you're not really needing the colors at that time.
Yes. So if you don't need to search for a basic land, you do have it on there to be a colorless land to just add extra mana to your mana pool.
Awesome.
So the next thing we're going to be looking at, I'm also running the Vivids. We have Vivid Crag, followed by Vivid Creek, and then last but not least, we have Vivid Marsh. Now, how the Vivids work is they come onto the battlefield tapped with 2 charge counters on them. And you can tap to add 1 mana of their color to the mana pool, or tap and remove a charge counter and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool.
Okay, so that's going to be a lot of value to be able to just kind of filter through the colors that you need, right?
Yes, it's going to allow me to filter through the colors that I need. If I'm running low on a color that I need and I have a Vivid untapped on there, I can go, well, I'm going to tap this red Vivid for black.
Well, there you go. And I know that's kind of a tricky thing because they just see a red card over there. They're thinking you're possibly tapping a mountain, and then all of a sudden you put an opt on the field.
Yep, which is fantastic to be able to do to throw your opponents off. Now, the next thing we're going to be looking at, we have some Anderson tap, but you gain 1 life. We have Dismal Backwater, Bloodfell Caves, and we have Swiftwater Cliffs. Now, what they do, they enter in tapped. They are dual lands. They come in tapped. You gain 1 life, but because of that, you do get to tap them for for any of their colors. Now, following that, we are also running the 3 Guild Gates in our colors. We're running Izzet Guild Gate, Dimir Guild Gate, and Rakdos Guild Gate. Yet again, they come in tapped. They don't do anything when they come in tapped, but they do add mana of either one of those specific color splices. Following that up, we have our last 2 non-basic lands. These are some of my favorites. I've said it in a video before, and I'll say it again. I always highly recommend running bounce lands. So, we have Dimir Aqueduct and Rakdos Carnarium for our bounce lands in here. How these work? They come into the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Tap and add 2 mana of its color splice. So you tap it, and for Rakdos, you add black-red, and for Dimir, you add blue-black to your mana pool. They tap for 2 mana as a land, so even though it looks like you're a land behind, you're actually on track of everybody else.
And that is definitely good value, having that on the field. And also, kind of a tricky way to do that, being able to get those lands on the field and being able to think that, hey, you don't have anything open for, say, a lot of the control cards are, 2 drops, and you have just one of those open. A lot of people are going to look across the table and think, oh, he's only got one mana. I'm free to play.
Yep. People don't really pay attention to what lands you have on tap. They just pay attention to the color of the land you have on tap. So if you have a land that taps for 2, if you say you've got 2 lands open and they're thinking, well, he's already cast Counterspell this turn, or he's cast something else that only costs 2, so his only options really are those 3-drop Counterspells. They're going to try to play around. They're going to try to play because they think, well, he doesn't have mana open. Then next thing you know, you tap an island, you tap Dimir Aqueduct, and boom, here comes that cancel, or even my personal favorite, an unwind.
And that is so much value. Now, looking at your basic lands, I thought for a second that this was mostly going to be red and blue with a splice of black, but it looks like you've really made up for that black in the non-basics. Is that kind of how you planned that?
Well, to be honest with you, if you most of the spells in here are actually Izzet colors.
Is it though?
Yes, it is. So the Izzet in this deck is the primary thing. It's one of the most powerful things in Storm is running that red-blue combo. The black is in there to help me control opponents out of the game, utilizing those Dimir counter spells and utilizing those the Rakdos removal cards.
The Rakdos hate.
Because nothing sounds better than a little Rakdos hatred, right?
That's right.
Alrighty. So moving on from there, we're going to be looking at artifacts. So moving into our artifacts, well, I'm utilizing artifacts in this deck to actually accelerate the deck. That's really the only purpose I have for them. So our first one, yet again, Commander staple. We're looking at Soul Ring. Yes, the perfect one-drop play to have is that Soul Ring. It's you tap it, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. It's a fantastic mode of acceleration in this deck. Following that, we're going to be running probably one of my favorite, yet at the same time least favorite mana artifacts, because it is Charismatic Lens. The thing about Charismatic Lens, it costs 2, tap to add 1 colorless to your mana pool, or you pay 1, tap it, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So it works as a mana filter whenever you need one. After that, keeping on with the idea of our 2-drop artifacts, we have our signets. We have Rakdos Signet, which is pay 1, tap, add red, black. We have Dimir Signet, which is pay 1, tap, add blue, black. And we have the Izzet Signet, which is pay 1, tap, and add blue, red. Now, our signets are also utilized primarily for mana filtering, but also turning 1 mana into 2 mana. It's another version of those bounce lands inside of this deck to continually accelerating towards the end game.
And that is just a lot of value, being able to do that and be able to get, those lands that maybe you have 1 land open, but you have a signet, you can play a 2-drop spell with that.
Which is exactly what they're designed for. It allows you to, yet again, look like you're only holding open that 1 mana so that you can drop that 2 mana counterspell on them. Following that, we have one of our, we're starting into our 3-drop artifacts. We are running one of my favorites, the Mana Geode. When it enters the battlefield, you get to scry 1. Automatically, value for days. You also get to tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, which yet again is a fantastic way to keep accelerating into that late game. On top of that, scrying a card in this deck, knowing the top of your deck is going to be one of the most important things about playing Storm.
That's pretty much any deck, though. Knowing what's on top of your deck, or being able to get the top of your deck to the bottom, so you don't have to worry about what might not need at that time. That's a lot of value in every deck, guys.
It is. But one of the big things about this deck is we have the ability to cast the top card of our deck as long as it's an instant or sorcery.
Oh, that is just sick.
It is. So next, we are looking at the Obelisk of Grixis. 3-drop artifact, tap to add a blue, black, or red to your mana pool. Yet again, another version of that tri-land that we showed earlier. Moving from there, we have our lockets. We have the Rakdos locket, we have the Dimir locket, and I'm probably assuming you're going to guess this next one, the Izzet locket. Now, what's fantastic about the lockets in this deck is, 1, they do tap to add one of its colors to that color splice, but on top of that, if you pay 4 and tap it, you can sack it and draw 2 cards. So in the late game, card advantage in this deck, yet again, is going to be an extremely important thing, because the more cards you have in your hand, the more powerful your Storm trigger is going to be, because you're just going to keep being able to stack cards on top of everything.
Oh, yeah.
So another 3-drop is the Worn Power Stone. It's like Soul Ring, but worse. It's a 3-drop. It comes in tapped. You tap, adds 2 waste to your mana pool, but it is still more acceleration. The beginning of this deck's game is to play as many of these accelerators as possible to get into your late game.
So you mean that with 1 Power Stone, Soul Ring, and say 2 lands, by turn 2, you could end that turn with 6 mana on the board?
You can. And with Worn Power Stone and Soul Ring both untapped on your field, why not tap them both and play our next 4-drop artifact, Primal Amulet. It's a 4-drop artifact. Instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. This is going to be very important because this deck is primarily instants and sorceries. But better than that, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you put a charge counter on Primal Amulet. If there are 4 or more charge counters on it, you may remove those counters and transform it. Now, this transforms into a land. And this land is fantastic, guys. Whenever it turns into it, it turns into the Primal Wellspring. So, how this works, you tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. When that mana is spent to cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy that spell and choose a new target for that copy. We're already starting to see our first levels of Storm showing up in this deck, being able to storm off, say, being able to copy, Narset's Reversal, targeting your personal counterspell to make a copy of that counterspell, put both Narset's Reversal and your counterspell back into your hand so that you can just continually hold open those counters for the rest of the game. There's nothing they can do about it.
Oh, that is just sick.
It is. Now, finally, for our last artifact, another 4-drop, Firemind's Vessel. It enters the battlefield tapped, but when it taps, you add 2 mana of different colors to your mana pool. So if I need to hold open Izzet, I can hold open Izzet. If I need to hold open Dimir, I can hold open Dimir. Or if I need to cast a Rakdos spell, I can cast a Rakdos spell. Just by holding open this one artifact, I managed to have any of the color splices that I need at any given time.
Oh yeah, and looking across the board, if you're tapped out and people just see, that silver bordered card, they're not going to realize that you're still holding that mana open and available.
Exactly, which also puts you at a huge advantage against your opponents. So, with that being said, that is all the artifacts we're running in this deck. As you notice, every single artifact in here is designed to do one thing and one thing only, and that is accelerate your level of play to that next step. So, up next, we're going to be showing you guys the enchantments. All right, so our first enchantment we're going to be looking at today is Firemind's Research. Now, it's really awesome. This enchantment is a 2-drop enchantment, and is it? Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a charge counter on Firemind's Research. For 1 in a blue, remove 2 charge counters from Firemind's Research, draw a card. For 1 in a red, remove 5 charge counters from Firemind's Research. It deals 5 damage to any target.
Ooh, that is deadly, because not only are you getting some card advantage and being able to draw the cards, but then able to deal that overhead damage. For anything like that later on in the game, that can be devastating.
It is. But mostly in this deck, I use it for the card advantage itself to just keep churning more cards into my hand, because the one thing you don't want to be doing when you're playing Storm is playing with a 1 or 2 hand deck.
Oh no, that's a deadly thing to do in any deck.
It is. So our next one we're looking at is Aria of Flame. Now this is one of my personal favorites, mainly because when it's a 3-drop, 1 red, 2 colorless, when Aria of Flame enters the battlefield, each opponent gains 10 life. Nobody likes to counter this spell because of that effect right there. Because when you're playing Commander, telling everyone, hey, who wants to gain 10 life? They all vote yes. You cast this. They're like, yay. Wait, what else does it do?
That's a great politicking card right there.
It is, because whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you put a verse counter on Aria of Flame. Then, it deals damage equal to the number of verse counters to it to target player or planeswalker. So at this point, after you put it down, go ahead and start casting out all your instants and sorceries and machine gunning your opponents down into nothingness.
Oh, that just sounds mean, and I can't tell you how many times play groups they'll fall right headlong for that trap of, okay, sweet, we're gaining life, but
well, yeah, it's just Storm. Everyone thinks that Storm, you have to gear yourself out to deal X amount of damage in a certain amount of time. So any card that's going to let us gain life in his deck, that's going to be counterproductive. They think I'm misplaying. So they just let you go ahead and do it.
Then that is such a good thing.
It is. So next, we're looking at a 4-drop enchantment. We have Precognition Field. It is 1 blue, 3 colorless enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library. You may cast the top card of your library if it's an instant or sorcery card. For 3, you can exile the top card of your library. This is fantastic, for it has that similar effect as Bolas' Citadel, but it only works for instants or sorceries. So if you're trying to mow through your deck real quick, pay 3, exile the top card to get rid of it if it's a land pocket, or you can just draw through it with any of the other draw engines in this deck to just keep on moving on, so you can just keep casting those instants and sorceries from the top of your library.
And that is so valuable. Any kind of effect that's going to let you play from the top of your library basically makes your hand 1 card extra.
Especially if they look at your hand and they don't see that you have a counterspell, but you're holding up a counterspell mana. They don't realize that you've been looking at the top of your deck, and that's where your counterspell's sitting.
Yes, that is so deadly and so much fun when you're able to pull that off.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of those instant sorceries again, we got our next 4-drop enchantment. We have Jace's Sanctum. For 1 blue and 3 colorless, instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Little reduce in there to make sure that you can just keep on churning those spells for even cheaper. When you cast an instant or sorcery spell, scry 1. Yet again, good way to abuse Precognition Field. Have Jace's Sanctum sitting right next to it. Cast a spell. If that card sitting on top is a land, go ahead and scry it down to the bottom. If you don't need it, or if you do, let it sit there. The choice is yours. That's what the powerful thing about this card is you get to choose what you're drawing.
And because of the way that the wording is paired on Precognition Field, you get to cast that card from the top of your deck, meaning you cast a spell and you're able to scry what the next card is, and you're able to scry that down to the bottom if you don't like it with Jace's Sanctum. So you're always going to guarantee based on what you're casting, not only from your hand, but what you're casting from the top of your deck too.
Yes, it is. It is a fantastic way to get more advantages over your opponents because the big thing about this deck is getting in there, getting in quick, and closing it out as fast as humanly possible. Next, we're looking at Arcane Melee. It is a 5-drop enchantment where instant and sorcery spells cost 2 less to cast. Yet again, most of your opponents are going to let you get away with this one because it affects them too. So when everyone's instants and sorceries are reduced, everyone looks at you and goes, "Yeah, I'm cool with it," or "Is everyone else cool with it?" And then they just let you have it. Little did they know that your deck is comprised 1/3 of instants and 1/4 of sorceries.
That also means that letting stuff like that stick, you already have 2 cards just in this, just in the enchantments here that's reducing your mana cost. So you're looking at some of the higher cost spells and sorceries and enchantments, or sorceries and instants that could just be 1-drops when normally they're 3, 4, and 5-drops.
And it does make the deck a lot faster to go through whenever you're casting all your most highest CMC instants and sorceries for 1.
That is just a lot of value. I love it.
Exactly. Now, next, we're looking at my personal favorite enchantment in this entire deck. It is the cream of the crop, la creme de la creme, in my opinion. It is Thousand Year Storm. So for 6 and for 4 and Izzet, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it. For each other instant and sorcery spell you've cast this before it this turn, you may choose a new copy for those copies. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have an enchantment in our deck that gives every instant and sorcery in our deck Storm, which is a phenomenal way to continue moving.
So, guys, what you're looking at on the board right now between Aria of Flame and Thousand Year Storm and Kess the Dissident Mage, if you untap with this, combo on the board, would you say that's pretty much game?
Every time that I've untapped with Aria of Flame, Thousand Year Storm, and Precognition Field with Arcane Melee sitting on the field, I've never lost. If I have those 4 sitting on the field, it's game on. Because it doesn't matter what they can do at this point, I will have more card advantage, I will be dealing more damage, because I'll always know what I'm going to draw into, and so I can make sure I can play that 1-drop to opt 17 times, so that I can draw 17 cards, or I can do even better with looking through, doing some of my looting combos with cards like Faithless Looting, so that I can just keep going through stuff. And I have even another looting card in here that allows me to untap 3 lands every time I cast it. The best thing is I'm going to copy it a whole bunch to just have infinite mana for the rest of my turn. I want to draw my deck out and just destroy everybody.
And that right there is just stupid crazy. This deck is a lot of fun to watch. Not a whole lot of fun to play against, though, speaking from personal experience.
Well, I know one thing. If you ever let me resolve this next one coming up, it's game from then on.
Oh, yeah? Well, let's see what that one is.
Guys, it's a 9-drop enchantment. It's Omniscience. You may cast spells from your hand without paying their mana cost. If there is any enchantment in this deck that I will fight tooth and nail to make sure resolves and stays on the board, that's it. Because at that point forward, my entire deck is going to be free as I continue off to combo and combo and combo, and there's nothing anyone can do about it.
That is just more value than what anybody should rightfully have in a deck, especially just in your enchantments. That basically turns your entire deck not only free, but being able to copy them God knows how many times because you're able to cast them for free. So you could literally play out your hand and then continuously not only scry, but draw out and play your entire deck until you hit to that 1 million gut shot for all we know.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal whenever it comes right down to it. When you look at all the enchantments, what you see here, the only enchantment that's really not necessary for any form of win condition is Firemind's Research. Everything else on this board, if you can untap with Aria Flame and any of those enchantments on the board, it's pretty much game from there. If you're going to tap with both Aria Flame and Thousand Year Storm, you don't even have to worry about it. And if you've got Arcane Melee amongst the mix, it's game over. And if anyone's dumb enough to let you resolve Omniscience, well, that's on them.
That's their funeral, right?
Pretty much. Alrighty, so next we're going to be looking at the creatures. Now in this deck, we don't have a whole lot of those, so. Alright, so up next we have our creatures. Now guys, I want to tell you right now, This is not a creatures deck. We got a whole 9 creatures.
Man, I tell you, that's a whole lot of aggro going on.
You say that, but it can be.
Oh, that sounds dangerous.
So let's take a look. First and foremost, we have Firebrand Archer. It's a 2-drop red. When a human archer, it's a 2 power, 1 toughness. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Firebrand Archer deals 1 damage to each opponent. So if I cast an artifact, take some damage. If I cast an enchantment, take some damage. And if I cast instants or sorceries, go ahead, take some damage.
Oh, that is just deadly. Especially with some of the other combos that you've seen in the deck with some of those enchantments, taking, being able to play from the top of your deck and maybe making them free. That is just stupid.
It's really good because you're whittling your opponents down for that big combo. Now next we have one of our mana reducers and another card in here that flips.
Oh, you love your flippy cards.
I do love flippy cards because they're like little hidden gems. All right, this one is the Curious Humongulus. Now, what's really cool, it's a 2-drop blue and a colorless. You tap, add 1 waste to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast an instant or sorcery spell. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 3 or more instants or sorcery cards in your graveyard, transform the Curious Humongulus. And whenever it transforms, it flips over into probably one of the coolest creatures in this deck, the Voracious Reader. It's an Eldrazi Humongulus, and it's a 3/4 with prowess. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Also, instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less.
That is a lot of value, being able to flip that card over and being able to not only give things prowess and give that prowess specifically, but also make your stuff cheaper. That is that's an easy way to get that a big boy quick.
Oh yeah. Now here is one of my favorite ones. It is one of the probably the most problematic cards in Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance whenever those sets came out. It is the Goblin Electromancer. For Izzet, a 2/2 Goblin Wizard. Instants or sorceries cost 1 less to cast. So everyone knows whenever you're playing against those Phoenix decks that this was probably one of the primary cards that you would see hit the field first. So what's really good about it in this deck is, yet again, instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast, and our win con is primarily instants and sorceries. So we want to reduce those as much as possible. After that, we have another 2-drop with a black 2-drop. It is Nightscape Familiar. Blue and red spells cost 1 less to cast. Also, for a black and colorless, regenerate Nightscape Familiar. It's a 1/1, and it is fantastic because, yet again, like I said, this is primarily an Izzet deck with a Grixis splicing, and we're finally starting to see some of that Grixis splice show up.
Yeah, we have gone through a lot of things, but not a whole lot of black so far. So seeing that color finally pop up is kind of nice.
It is. Now, another one we have, yet again, a very common card to be seen from the Ravnica block. I actually chose to go with a different art with this one, though, and we're talking about Gutter Snipe. For a red and 2, it's a Goblin Shaman 2/2. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. So with Gutter Snipe and Firebrand Archer on the field at the same time, every time you cast an instant or sorcery, each opponent's going to eat a lightning bolt.
And if you're casting those for free, that's just deadly.
It is.
That's a whole lot of lightning bolts.
So another 3-drop we have is a Human Wizard. For 2 red and 1 colorless, we have the Dualcaster Mage. It has Flash. Whenever Dualcaster Mage enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose a new target for the copy, which is fantastic to be able to get even more spells going off.
Yes, it is.
Now, we have our next one we have is a 4-drop in the form of the Archaeomancer. The Archaeomancer, 2 blue, 2 colorless. When it enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. It is a 1/2, so it's not got much of a body, but its effect is going to be phenomenal. So you can go ahead and, instead of getting the 2 castings from Kess, you can cast it, play Archaeomancer, cast that again, and then use Kess to give it flashback and cast a spell again, giving a 3rd cast on it and being able to get Thousand Year Storm to proc it up around 6 times.
And that, guys, is just so much value. This deck, is all about playing those instants and sorceries, getting them as cheap as possible, dealing as much damage overhead, and possibly running away with the game out of nowhere.
Well, I like how you mentioned overhead because our next one, yet again from the Ravnica, from Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance, I'm showing off the Crackling Drake because I want to get some benefits for all of those instants and sorceries that are either going to be in the graveyard or in exile. So for 2 blue and 2 red, I'm going to play a star 4 flying Drake. Crackling Drake's power is equal to the number of instants and sorcery cards you own in exile and in your graveyard. And when it enters the battlefield, my favorite part of this card, you get to draw a card. So it replaces itself. So our final creature in this deck is a 6 drop for 1 red, 5 colorless. We have the Charmbreaker Devils. Now, these little devils are fantastic because it is a 4/4. At the beginning of your upkeep, return an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard to your hand. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Charmbreaker Devils gets +4, +0 until end of turn. So it's like this really, really powerful form of prowess to get this creature really big. So if you do have to put that aggression out there, you can cast a bunch of instant and sorcery spells, get lots of free lightning bolts hitting your opponents in the face, and then swing with a 44 Charmbreaker Devil.
That is just stupid. Being able to get that big, get it stupid, and cast those things, or be able to grab those things from the graveyard back to your hand, that is a lot of value, guys. And, I have seen you, Bronson, take off with this thing probably more times than I care to remember.
It is probably one of my favorite creatures in this deck, other than my Humongulus, but mostly because the Humongulus nobody really sees coming.
No, especially the flippy cards, nobody sees those coming.
Exactly. So, guys, those are all of our creatures that we're going over. Next, I'm going to be showing you guys the sorceries. We're actually getting into the meat of this deck finally. All right, so guys, whenever we look at our sorceries, the first one I'm going to be showing you today is Faithless Looting. Now, Faithless Looting is a very popular card in even red decks and Izzet decks alike. It's a 1-drop red spell, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. On top of that, it has pay 3 for flashback. You may cast this card from your graveyard for its flashback cost, then exile it. Honestly, flashback's not really going to matter because with Kess, we'll be able to do it for 1 anyways. But what's really cool about this is it allows us to get through those dead cards in our hand, get some new cards going on, and if we need to just go ahead and dump things into our graveyard and then cast them out of the graveyard with Kess, it's still going to be just as good. So it has a lot of value, especially for building up those storm triggers that we're looking for. That's why there's going to be a lot of 1-drops we're going to be seeing in here, all right?
Oh yeah, every time that I have a chance to do flashback, or play Faithless Looting in a deck, that it is such a good card to be able to sort through your deck a little bit and do it again.
It is fantastic. The next one we're going to be looking at, we've got Preordain. For 1 blue, this sorcery allows you to scry 2, then draw a card. People don't really understand the value of scry until your deck runs off of it. Knowing what you're drawing into is going to be an amazing amount of value. And with Precognition Field on the board, you'll be able to look at your top card of your library at any time to know what you're scrying through and what you scryed into before you draw. Up next, we've got Ponder. Very awesome card in here yet again. 1 blue. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. You may shuffle your library, then draw a card. Very powerful. Just like Preordain, knowing what you're going to draw is going to give you a lot of abilities. But we don't just want to know what we're going to draw. We also need to know what our opponents are holding in their hand. So we're going to be looking at one of my favorite blue spells in here, Gitaxian Probe. For either 1 blue mana or you pay 2 life, look at target player's hand, then draw a card. And if you've got Thousand Year Storm on the field, and this is the 4th card that you've played this turn, you're going to get to see everybody's hand and then draw a bunch of cards.
Getting to pay that Phyrexian mana is always good value.
Yep. I always live by the mono black motto, which is your life total is just another resource to be utilized. Moving on from there, we actually have our very first true storm card. This card has won me many a games with this deck by looking at Grape Shot. For a 1 red and a colorless, Grape Shot deals 1 damage to target player, but it has Storm. When you play this spell, copy it. For each spell played before it this turn, you may choose new targets for the copies. One of my biggest plans with this card is to go in through a huge combo to just keep making more and more mana to keep casting more and more spells. to cast Grape Shot to copy it anywhere between 30 to 40 times with Thousand Year Storm on the field, adding up the rest of those 30 to 40, so that I'm able to eliminate one player right then and there with just one spell.
Oh yeah, that is such a good card. Being able to just out of nowhere come from, well, he's not really doing anything, to all of a sudden, you just put the game on a timer. If you didn't even just outright win.
It's a fantastic card. But our next one, we're looking at one of our outright win cards. Now, we're putting a lot of instants and sorceries into our graveyard and even exiling some of them. So I thought to myself, I said, self, how do we capitalize on that? And I looked at Beacon Bolt for Izzet and one colorless. Beacon Bolt deals damage to target creature equal the number of instants or sorcery cards in your exile and in your graveyard. And it has Jumpstart, so you can cast it again by discarding a card from your hand. Then you exile the card. But in order to get past that, we just utilize Kess to flash it back to do it again. And if you need to wipe out someone's board state, all you have to do is have Thousand Year Storm on the field. Make sure it's somewhere in your chain to hit them a whole lot with that spell.
Such a good card. And you're exactly right. That is an outright win card. Being able to just go off the rails, and that jumpstart ability is definitely a lot of value on it.
It is. The only problem with Beacon Bolt is it targets creatures, not players. But if you've got that player that's got their win con creature on the board, this is going to be able to just outright obliterate that creature if you've got enough instants and sorceries in the bin. Now, the next one that I'm going to be looking at is one of our draw cards. Also, we all know that the players at the table don't have the best poker faces, and you can see that look on their face whenever they get that one card that they've been waiting for the whole game, but they got to wait to play it. So we're going to make sure they don't get to. We're going to hit them with Windfall. Windfall says that each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. If someone has 7 cards in their hand, and that's the most cards anyone's got in their hand, everyone's going to draw 7. But if somebody has, say, 20 cards in their hand, everyone's going to draw 20, which is a fantastic way to saying, I'm going to refill my hand. I like to put this somewhere in my storm combos, usually to start my storm combo off, to be honest. Because if I need to get rid of the stuff in my hand, then this is going to be one of my first spells, so I make sure I don't deck myself with it. Now, an upgrade to this deck is putting Laboratory Maniac and Notion Thief in here to put Laboratory Maniac out. Make sure at least one person, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else, has 20 cards in hand. Play Windfall, then flash Notion Thief on the field, so that whenever it hits the field, instead of your opponents getting to draw those 20 cards, they just discard their hands, and you get to draw a card for each card that would be drawn by an opponent this way.
That is definitely a good combination. Anytime that you have a way to be able to kind of cycle through your hand, if you've got a dead hand, or if you're looking for answers specifically that are in your deck, that's always a good way to do that kind of wheel effect, if you will, to be able to get through those.
Which is a fantastic way to win. With Laboratory Maniac, its effect specifically says that if you draw a card from an empty deck, you win the game. If you're looking for upgrades for this deck, that is one of the first ones that I recommend. Windfall, I utilize it to dump dead hands and go ahead and get new ones, and to make sure that my opponents can't get a powerful hand against me. Now, if I can't find what I'm looking for, one of the other cards in here that is going to help us out, we're looking at one of my personal favorites, Diabolic Tutor. For 2 and 2 black, we're going to search our library for a card, put that card in the hand, then shuffle the library. Now, with all the cost reducers in this deck, you're looking at actually casting Diabolic Tutor for just 2 black mana, which shows that, we're going to be casting it for the equivalence of a Demonic Tutor instead. Now, the other cool thing is that if you put this in your Storm Chain, 3rd or 5th from the on the stack, then you're looking at Diabolic Tutoring 3 to 4 times in one turn, then having it hit the graveyard and using Kess to cast it again to hit it for another round, and literally pulling every win con from your deck into your hand immediately to just start destroying them.
With Diabolic Tutor, is that and all of the reducers, is that the reason you don't have Demonic Tutor in here?
Well, it's for 2 reasons. Demonic Tutor is notoriously expensive. It's a $30 card at the moment. So I actually took Demonic Tutor out of the deck because it was so expensive to run, and I wanted to make sure that this deck was under budget. On top of that, with Diabolic Tutor and all the other tutors we have in here being with our mana reducers, every tutor in here with at least 2 mana reducers on the field is going to cost the same as Demonic Tutor. And some of them even have some effects that are a little bit better than Demonic Tutor that you would pay that extra mana to do and get better value out of it.
And you just can't beat that. If you're basically getting the same card, or the same card as a $30-$40 card, upwards to when it was even $70 or $80 just a couple months ago, and you're able to basically get that same effect for the same mana drop, why wouldn't you do that?
Exactly. Now, another black card that we have, because we are starting to showcase some of the black spells we have, is another Storm card. And this is one of the unsung heroes of this deck. I've pulled it off a few times and have just outright won by storming it off 50 plus times. And this is Tendrils of Agony. For 2 black, 2 colorless, target player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Then it has Storm, which when you play this spell, copy it for each spell played before it this turn. You may choose new targets for those copies. Now that is a extraordinarily powerful thing to do in this deck, is storming off and then copying the original Storm card with Thousand Year Storm to add even more power. Now, unfortunately, when Thousand Year Storm copies a Storm card, those cards aren't technically cast, so they don't get their Storm property. But you can cast it, then turn around and cast it again with Kess, which is how it usually wins the game.
And just any of those Storm triggers, you've already shown one Storm card in here. And this one also has the Storm trigger on it. And having a black Storm card is actually surprising because you don't see Storm in black very often.
I believe this is actually the only black card that has Storm in it.
And, I think you're right. Now, guys, if you guys know some cards that might, have some Storm in black, let us know, because obviously we don't know everything, like I've mentioned in the past, and we're wanting to learn just as much as you guys are.
All right, so our next one is another one of these cards. Now, I mentioned that we can actually turn this deck into an aggro deck.
You did. I remember that.
Whenever we're going over creatures, one of the reasons we don't run a lot of creatures is because actually this deck hides one of the primary cards in Goblins. We're looking at Empty the Warrens. For 1 red and 3 colorless, create 2 1/1 red Goblin creature tokens. And it has my favorite card typing ever, Storm. You cast a bunch of spells, you make a bunch of tokens, you copy that spell a whole bunch, make even more tokens. Thousand Year Storm copies that spell, make even more tokens. Then you use Kess and do it again. So you can be looking at putting anywhere between 30 to 40 Goblin tokens on the board in just one turn.
Oh, and that is stupid. If you're sitting across the table from that Goblin deck and you wind up putting 30 or 40 Goblins on the table, you're looking at them like, come on, man, I'm not even dedicated to this.
Exactly. Which is hilarious to watch those Goblin players start to sweat. So speaking of that early aggression, though, I actually put in some cards to get rid of early aggression. Now, we know what Cyclonic Rift is, but I personally, there's a reason why I'm called the budget commander. And it's because I don't like spending a whole lot of money for cards. And so this one, I'm utilizing Devastation Tide. For 2 blue and 3 colorless, return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. Yes, this includes your permanents as well, but with a miracle cost of 2, that early aggro, all those tokens being put on there by those pesky Goblin decks is going to get sent right back to their hand and got rid of, which in the early game is fantastic. And we all know how powerful it is to hit your opponents with that Cyclonic Rift. Personally, I find Devastation Tide to be just as good. The only downside is it doesn't leave my board alone. If you're looking to upgrade, I would replace Devastation Tide with Cyclonic Rift, but doing so will also take your deck out of the bargain bin approved area.
Yes, definitely. And this deck, from what I understand, is already pushing it. So, we're going to have to definitely make those upgrades and stuff to it if you're wanting to make it just that much more lethal.
Oh, yes. Now, we have another tutor in this deck. Now, this tutor shows up in the form of Razaketh's Right. For 3 colorless and 2 dedicated black, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. It's also got pay 1 black and cycle, so if you don't need the tutor for whatever reason, you can go ahead and cycle it to draw a card. However, yet again, with that 3 colorless mana with our mana reducers in here, you're going to be looking at paying for it again at almost the exact same price as the mana cost for Demonic Tutor. So, just because I don't run Demonic Tutor doesn't mean that I'm not running Demonic Tutor.
Oh yeah, and you're running a couple tutor cards for sure.
Well, yeah, we got our next one right here. Now, this one pretty much pays for itself. It's one of my all-time favorites. We've got Dark Petition. 3 colorless, 2 dedicated black yet again. Search your library for a card, then put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. It has Spell Mastery. If there are 2 or more instants or sorcery cards in your graveyard, you add 3 black mana to your mana pool. So storming that one off feels really, really good.
Oh yeah, being able to not only tutor but then untap those, or not necessarily untap, but add that 3 mana. That is so valuable.
Oh yeah. Now we're already exiling cards in our graveyard as it is, so if we're binning cards we don't need and they're not instant sorceries because we don't have anything to recur creatures, they get destroyed, and also we don't have anything to recur lands. I decided to go ahead and put in one of my favorite draw cards in this deck, which is Treasure Cruise. So Treasure Cruise is a 8-drop, 7 colorless, 1 blue with Delve. Each card you exile from your graveyard while casting the spell pays for 1 of the colorless mana. Draw 3 cards. With our mana reducers, you're not going to be having to exile a whole lot, and you're still going to get to drop those 3 cards, which is fantastic.
Yes, it is definitely an outstanding card to have in this. Being able to delve this sorcery onto the board, but then get that card advantage. That's just a win-win, especially in a deck. If you have stuff in the graveyard that you can't recur with Kess or something else, why not get some value out of those still?
What's also really good about that is we're going to also be storming that card off. With Thousand Year Storm, we're going to be casting copies of Treasure Cruise, which means we're not going to just draw 3 cards. We're going to draw 6 or even 9, sometimes 12 cards off of Treasure Cruise.
And that is so valuable.
It is. So that is actually all the sorceries we're running in this deck. You'll notice there's a lot more sorceries than there is a whole anything else, but now we're getting into the real meat and potatoes of this deck, the instants, where things really start to cook. So now we are getting into the meat of the deck. We have our instances. Now, we have most of our deck is instances. So we're going to be starting off with our 1-drops and moving our way up just like normal. And our first one, I like to give myself as many options as possible. So we're looking at Opt. And nothing makes me feel better than a turn 1 Opt.
Well, for instance, Bronson, if you're wanting to try and top deck early on, that's definitely the best option on the board, isn't it?
Oh yes, for 1 blue mana, I get to scry 1 and then draw a card. It is fantastic early game. It's fantastic late game. It's fantastic in the mid game. I've never found a time it's not great.
You're exactly right. And what's even better is, if you have Opt in your hand and you have that 1 mana open and somebody's thinking that you're about to, do a counter spell or something, or unsummon or something like that, and you don't, it makes them kind of scared to play something. But then it comes around like beginning of your, at the end of the last player's, end step, in response, turn 1 Opt.
Well, what makes me feel even better is whenever that last player is playing something, like I'm going to cast a creature and you go in response, and they're like, oh no, here comes a counterspell. I Opt.
Yep, and just getting that heart rate pumping a little bit. Commander is just as much a mind game as it is anything else.
Oh yes. Now speaking of mind games, this is one of my favorites. For 1 blue, we're going to make all of our islands do double duty. We're going to play High Tide. Now until end of turn, all islands produce an additional blue mana when tapped for mana. Now it's really cool. I am so looking forward to storming that card off, so that all of my islands tap for 2, 3, or even 4 mana.
That is just stupid with Expansion Explosion on the board. That just gives us such an opportunity to just go critical stupid on that.
It is. This deck actually has an underlying mill win con that a lot of people don't realize. And one of those mill cards in here is Thought Scour. For 1 blue, target player puts the top 2 cards of his library into his or her graveyard. So, and then you get to draw a card. So storming this off for 5 or 6 times, copying it a whole bunch, you're looking at getting rid of a good portion of your opponent's deck.
And if you're able to get rid of a good portion of a player's deck, and they don't have any kind of graveyard recursion themselves, like you have a lot of it in this deck, with Kess, it's just the best graveyard recursion for instants and sorceries there is, in my opinion. that means that you're getting rid of a lot of other players' answers.
which is fantastic to be able to take players out. Now, the next one we're going to be looking at is a brainstorm. For 1 blue, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand to the top of your library in any order. So if you got those cards you don't worry about playing right now, you can draw into them at your leisure. You can go ahead and dump those cards, put them onto the top, and then if you have anything that lets you to scry them to the bottom if you really don't need them. Or just draw them as they come up. Or you can storm this card off a whole lot and just keep filling your hand up with exactly what you need.
And I like that a lot. The idea of being able to really kind of go into critical minds mode and set the top of your deck exactly what you want it to be, and for the next couple turns out is a terrific idea.
Now another one, this card has dual purposes. Purpose 1, creature control. Purpose 2, player removal. We're looking at an oldie but a goodie, the red staple itself. We got for 1 red, Lightning Bolt. So Lightning Bolt deals 3 damage to target creature or player. And with Thousand Year Storm being able to copy this card a whole bunch, you're looking at being able to tap 1 red and eliminating someone from the game.
So you mean you have Lightning Bolt on another card as well as Lightning Bolt? So you're able to cast Lightning Bolt and then do 3 damage from the enchantment also?
From the 2 creatures sitting on the board that also equal Lightning Bolt? Yes.
That is so mean.
And then copy Lightning Bolt 12 times to do 36 damage to target opponent.
That is just stupid. And if you're not facing an Outlast deck, that's pretty much player removal right there.
It is very good player removal, but it's also for those pesky creatures that are on the board. You can also, due to the changing of Oracle text, you can also bolt Planeswalkers.
Really?
Yes, you can. I've actually used this in a win con not too long ago because I went into a mill combo and my opponent I didn't realize was playing Jace. So right before his Jace triggered its win ability, I went ahead and bolted his Jace into oblivion.
And that is such a good idea because that is any target, right?
Yes, it is. Pretty much, it just says if it's got power, toughness, loyalty, or life points, go ahead and kill it.
Daggum, that's a lot of value.
It is. Now next we have another Phyrexian card. Phyrexian cards in this deck are primarily because I don't like spending mana when I can spend it on something else. This only deals 1 point of damage to an opponent, but Gut Shot is fantastic. For either 1 red or 2 life, you can deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Gut Shot sees a lot in modern play for Storm decks because paying 2 life and then dealing 12 damage is a lot of stuff, or just getting another counter up on your Storm triggers.
Oh yeah, and I've already talked about that card. Before that, that's actually a win con that you've used against me right there.
It is a fantastic one. Now, going into win cons I've used against people and win cons that I thoroughly enjoy, this is my all-time favorite. We're looking at one of our first 2-sided cards. We have Expansion Explosion.
Which I just mentioned that card not even 5 minutes ago.
Exactly. Now, this is an amazing card because for either is it colors, or you can just do 2 red, or if you got High Tide active, tap 1 island, get 2 blue. You can copy target instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 4 or less. You may choose new targets for the copy. Now that's really good. But the other hand, and Zach, I used this one against you whenever you were playing a life gain deck, Explosion. I managed to generate 50 mana and then explosioned you, but then I copied it 7 times, forcing you to draw your entire deck.
Yeah, and that's what really did me in because I was definitely playing a life gain deck and an Outlast deck there, and I can't do much when I mill myself or draw myself out.
Yes, because for 2 red, 2 blue, and X, Explosion deals X damage to any target, then target player draws X cards. Now, the thing is, if you want to draw those cards as the caster, you can target yourself to draw. If you want your opponent to mill themselves out, you can target them. The choice is yours, but this is a fantastic and phenomenal way to get that win off, and can even, with enough mana and thought put behind it, eliminate every player on the at the table simultaneously by targeting the people who aren't playing life gain with the damage side and target the Outlast players with the mill side.
And that is just outstanding.
It is. This deck requires you to do a little bit of foresight before you make your plays. Now we have another one of those double-sided cards. We have Discovery Dispersal. Discovery has Surveil 2, then draw a card. For blue or black and one colorless, you're able to Surveil 2, draw a card. And you can storm this card off with Thousand Year Storm to just keep drawing and dumping stuff you don't need into the graveyard. Or you can do Dispersal. For one blue, one black, and three colorless, each opponent returns a non-land permanent they control with the highest converted mana cost among permanents they control to its owner's hand, then discards a card. And I have actually managed to copy this upwards of 6 to 7 times in one game and forced my opponents to take their massive, big board-winning board states and put them right back in their hands and then discard every card in their hand in the process.
That is so valuable, being able to do that, and not only forcing them to discard, but then having the other option. Once again, having options on the table for the state of the game that you're in, and being able to have a little bit of foresight as to what you're going to need to do. Those cards are basically 2 cards in one, and that is just so much value. You're basically looking at a deck here with 102 cards just with those 2 alone, adding them.
Yes, and with the flashback recursion, you're actually looking more around 150 cards in this deck.
With all of Kess triggers and everything else.
Exactly.
It is, you're looking at just some crazy numbers that are coming up here.
Now, we have another one for 2 red. You can cast Increasing Vengeance, which is copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, copy that spell twice instead. You may choose new targets for the copy. And it has flashback for 5. So, like I said with Kess, we're probably not going to utilize its flashback cost, but if it is cast from a graveyard, even with Kess's version of flashback, it still gets that trigger of copying that spell twice. So if you want to just go ahead and say, you know what, I don't like what you're doing over there, so I'm just going to keep copying my stuff until you die, this is a great way to be able to get those triggers going, because with Thousand Year Storm on the field, if it's cast from the graveyard and then it copies itself 5 or 6 times, you're looking at copying target spell 10 to 12 times.
And just all of these copy triggers, I mean, this gets out of hand really quick, guys. So.
It does. Now, we do have to run some rituals in here because it does require some mana to make this stuff happen. But, cool thing about rituals, they're usually instants. So, we're looking at, for 2 mana, Desperate Ritual. Add 3 red to your mana pool. And it has Splice onto Arcane. For 2, as you cast an Arcane spell, you may reveal this card from your hand and pay its Splice cost. If you do, add this card's effects to that spell. We're not running any Arcane in this deck, but still for 2 mana, or because of our mana reducers, 1 mana, adding 3 mana, you're looking at the red version of Dark Ritual. Then storming it off 4, 5, 6 times, you're looking at adding a boatload of mana to your mana pool.
Which is so good. That plus the one that gives you 3 black. Whenever you said Dark Ritual, I saw another card in here that's giving you that 3 black as well. I mean, these are cards that are going to give you so much value and allow you to just do so many more things with these storm triggers, right?
Exactly, because your opponent's like, you're tapped out, right? And you're over there with a book sitting next to you, keeping track of how much mana you have floating at this point.
You could be looking at 10, 12, 15 mana floating, and your opponents are thinking you're about to end your turn when actually you're about to storm off even more.
I've God-handed this once, and I'm going to be honest with you, I floated 500 red mana.
That is
ridiculous
and almost unheard of.
It was hilarious because I just kept redoing spells, and my opponents couldn't do anything about me. And even the control player trying to play counter magic, because I was copying every counter spell that I cast, they couldn't out-counter me.
And that is a really good thing about these colors. Being able to do that and get those, those counters and get those copies and stuff, that's game winning right there.
It can be. And I've even shut down Simic Control doing that exact method. So here's a really cool one. I talked about creature removal We've shown Lightning Bolt as some creature removal, but we have dedicated creature removal as well. We're running Terminate. For Rakdos, we can destroy target creature, and it can't be regenerated. For those folks with the that are playing those regenerate decks, let's just go ahead and blitz those creatures. Now, what's even better about that? Storm. We're going to storm. Thousand Year Storm is going to set this thing to where you're casting it and then copying it 3, 4, or 5 times, so you can pretty much use it as a mini board wipe. If that one player's got that Platinum Angel on the board, not anymore, buddy.
Let's get rid of that.
And even if they counter Terminate, Thousand Year Storm is still going to have 3 more Terminates heading its way.
Man, that is something else. So it allows you to floof that bird many times over.
If you need to, you can. Now we're going to look at Impulse. Impulse is for 1 blue and a colorless. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. This card is amazing for, yet again, that card advantage, being able to dig through the crap you don't want at the time, because if you've already got all of your storm triggers happening, you've got a game-winning strategy, and you just need to get those cards like Grave Shot, or get cards like Tendrils of Agony into your hand to win the game. This card's going to help you dig very quickly through all of that to make sure that it happens. Now, we're also looking at a little bit of control. I've said we're running control a lot. We haven't really seen a whole lot of spell control. We've seen creature control. So let's take a look at our first one. We've got Negate, an oldie but a goodie classic. This one's from M11 for 2 mana, counter target non-creature spell. And with our mana reducers, for 1 blue, counter target or non-creature spell.
And that guys is the epitome of blue control.
It is. Now on top of that, we also are running Arcane Denial. So for yet again 2-drop counter target spell, its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. You draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. If you're in that counter off fight, Arcane Denial is going to come in a lot of handy. Yet again, 1 blue after our mana reducers hit, and we're looking at countering target spell, period. It's the cheapest counter spell in here that hits everything.
Oh yeah, and that is so good.
And I'm never even concerned about the drawback of my opponent drawing cards, because I can make them discard their hand with Discovery Dispersal anyways.
Which is a terrific combo that you can pull off on this. And you're really the combo player, aren't you?
I love combo decks. They just make me really happy. Now, our final 2-drop and our final 2-drop counter spell, we are running Counter Squall. For Dimir colors, counter target non-creature spell, its controller loses 2 life.
That is just, I mean, if you're gonna do something, why not go overboard with it? And if you're able to not only counter that spell, but also make them lose life for even trying to cast that spell.
I've had opponents that when I'm storming off, they tried to actually just exile my stack by utilizing things like Serum Denial, and I've used Counter Squall to get rid of that card and then deal them damage and punish them, and then I just make a whole bunch of copies of other burn spells and take them out next, because you know what? If you're going to try to exile my stack, I'm just going to exile that player.
And that, guys, is a lot of value.
It is. Alrighty, so following that up, we've got our 3 drops. We're looking at our first one, Unlicensed Disintegration. We're running quite a few Mana Rock artifacts in here, so this card has a lot of value. For Rakdos and a colorless, destroy target creature. If you control an artifact, Unlicensed Disintegration deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. So yet again, not only are you able to destroy a creature, but then free lightning bolts, kids.
Once again, getting that value of being able to punish those players for trying to play Magic. This is kind of just a mean deck.
It is. It's a how dare you come to my table and play.
Which is a lot of fun to watch, but not a whole lot of fun to play against.
I've got a lot of flack for this deck at our local game shop. They actually asked me to stop playing it.
It's because they have problems doing anything with it. Because, I mean, coming up with these things on the fly and seeing, hey, that's a problem, I got to take care of that, and you know what? I'm going to take care of you in the process. And anyone's going to have problems.
It's pretty dirty, especially with Unlicensed Disintegration against a token deck. Like, look, I made 40 Goblin tokens. You're like, cool. All I got to do is copy the spell how many times in order to kill you?
About that many.
So, up next, we have one of the classic counter spells. Now, to be honest, the reason why I'm not actually running the original counter spell is because I couldn't find a copy.
So, kind of my problem when I was looking for Rakdos Guildgate was your problem with Counterspell.
Yes, I went on to all kinds of places. I went to my local game stores. I was like, hey, you guys got a counterspell? They were like, no, we're all sold out. That and I'm really finicky on my art.
The art has got to be good because, I mean, if I know you're not too big at the whiteboarded cards, are you?
I'm really not. You won't see a whole lot of them in the stuff that I play. But this one we're talking about, guys, it's cancel. For 2 blue and a colorless, counter target spell.
Good old cancel, been around for years.
Been around for a long time, oldie but a goodie, and with our mana reducers, it's got the same casting cost as counterspell anyway, so why need it?
Huh, look at that.
Look at that. So, also, storming it off to destroy people. Now, I've said that I've made a lot of mana in this deck before, and this is how. Mana reducers plus 1 red equals Seething Song. Add 5 red mana to your mana pool. I have cast this at the end of my chains to go in to let it all resolve to go into Expansion Explosion. And guys, this deck is easily able to string 10 to 12 casts together before you go into that ultimate play.
Oh, that just sounds dirty. And being able to reduce that down to just the 1 red mana. So basically, you're getting 4 free mana.
You are. Now, how do I keep casting those spells though? Well, Zach, you figured this out the hard way last time that you played against this deck. I like to storm off a little card I like to call Frantic Search. Frantic Search is for 2 colorless and a blue. You can draw 2 cards, but then, like Faithless Looting, you got to discard 2 cards. But on the upside, you get to untap 3 lands.
And you could storm that off for free, basically, because you're tapping and untapping the same 3 lands over and over and over.
Continuously floating that mana. And so I tap my 3 lands, and then I untap them, and then I tap out, untap 3, tap out, untap 3, tap out, untap 3. It just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going while I'm drawing cards, discarding cards, building the perfect hand. And then when I need to, if I look like I'm about to deck out, because most of my win cons are instants in here, in response to my next Frantic Search resolving, I'm going to now end the game.
And that, guys, that I have seen that done personally. That actually happened to me the last time I played this deck. I thought I had that deck in the bag, and next thing you know, he's floating 50 or 60 mana, and he grape shotted me for I can't even remember that number, probably 100 and something.
I don't even remember either. All we just knew is that it was dead, because following that grape shot, I played Expansion Explosion and said, I'm going to mill you.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, up next, we have one of my favorite spells, because what's better than 1 lightning bolt?
A lot of them.
A lot of them. So we have Wizard's Lightning. If you notice, the commander itself is a human wizard, and most of the creatures in this deck happen to also be wizards. So this spell costs 2 less to cast if you control a wizard, but even if you don't control a wizard, we got mana reducers. So chances are you're casting it for 1 anyways. And Wizard's Lightning deals 3 damage to any target. Yet again, storm it off. You've got lightning bolts heading their way. Follow it up. Cast some more lightning bolts.
Well, and this deck is perfect for you because you do like Spellslinger decks, and this is the ultimate Spellslinger deck. So you're basically a wizard just along, side Kess and, the rest of these spells.
Oh, yes. There's actually been games where I forgot to cast Kess.
There have been games that you've had so much fun playing this deck that you've forgotten to win, Bronson.
I know, it's still accidentally won. Now, one of my favorite counterspells in this deck, especially to storm off against people trying to take me down, because after you get to a certain point, they're coming for you.
Yes,
And a lot of times, folks come at you with those other burn spells, counter spells, things like that. So, I like to unwind them. For 1 blue and 2 colorless, counter target non-creature spell, untap up to 3 lands.
And that is once again, that along with Frantic Search is so much value being able to tap and untap those.
It is fantastic. So even if you don't have the mana reducers, it pays
for itself every time that it's, pays for itself the first time, and then every copy past that, you keep floating even more.
Yes, because if you notice, it says counter target non-creature spell, untap up to 3 lands. That's a period after that.
Yes, it is. That means that one of them resolves and then the next trigger hits.
Exactly. Now, we're running another one that I like to utilize. No Escape. Creature decks, eat your heart out. This still 3-drop. counter target creature or planeswalker spell, so goodbye Super Friends. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it in the owner's graveyard. Then scry 1.
And that scry ability, once again, making sure that you're able to keep the top of your deck what you want it to be to make sure you're not going to dead hand the next couple turns is outstanding.
It is. Now, this next card we have, if you're playing the politic game, this is very good early game for especially with folks trying to be your friend, because everyone tries to befriend the control player.
Well, of course, who doesn't?
So this one right here, we have Factor Fiction. Pretty much what it is, you pay 1 blue, 3 colorless, reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, put 1 pile into your hand, the other in the grave. And I do love its flavor text. Every choice is a joy.
And that is such a good card. And being able to befriend the control player, you being in this case, or even if there's another control player at the deck and at the table, making them separate those cards, they know just as well as you what's good and what's bad. And most of the time in this deck, there's not any good or any bad choices.
Exactly. So people wind up ultimately screwing themselves. They'll either do a 4 card to 1 card, or they'll do the 3-2 split. I did have one guy, because he was playing buddies and trying to be everyone's friend. He actually gave me a 5-0 split.
Did he really?
Yes. And I laughed because putting all 5 of those cards in my hand, I won the game that turn.
Of course he did.
Now, here's really cool. And our next one, more creature removal. We have the Price of Fame, because being famous can be costly. So for 1 black and 3 colorless, you can cast this instant, destroy target creature. But wait, if this spell costs 2 less to cast if it targets a legendary creature. And then you get to surveil too. So you got that pesky enemy commander on the field. They keep trying to do stuff to where that's making your life hard. You know what? Go ahead, cast this spell. But hey, storm it off in the process, copy it a whole bunch, and just get rid of that board state while you're at it.
And that is just mean. And you're right, there is a price of fame. I went to Walmart just the other day, and people started whispering behind my back. I felt like I was famous.
Oh, wow. Was it sure it wasn't that kick me sign I put back there?
Nobody has to know.
Now, our final instant in this deck, we already showed you Treasure Cruise. I'm running the other form of it. So for 2 blue, 6 colorless, we have Dig Through Time. For yet again, Delve. Each card you exile from your graveyard while casting the spell pays for 1. Look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand, put the rest in the bottom of your library in any order. This is fantastic for building that ultimate hand and storming it off a bunch in order to get that perfect hand built.
Once again, you're already getting a lot of value from your graveyard, being able to recast things and get all that, all those triggers with Kess, being able to delve any card onto the field and get that value from those cards that you're not, recasting with Kess or, any of the other cards, Flashback, Faithless Looting, something like that. This is going to be so valuable, being able to get, still get value from those cards after you've already played them.
Yes. Now, one of the really cool things is about Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise. A lot of folks look at them and go, look, I don't like paying 8 mana for an instant or a sorcery. With all the mana reducers in here, when you look at every single one of them put together, Treasure Cruise ultimately will cost 2 mana with every one of them on the field, and Dig Through Time will also cost 2 mana.
I think the last time that you played this, you managed to get it out there for 3 mana, and it was devastating. That you got the perfect hand, and I think you ended up winning the game either that turn or next.
It is a fantastic spell. That's why I enjoy it so much. And to storm it off 2, 3, or 4 times is going to allow you to go through and just pick and choose what you're wanting. It's like you're playing Dredge without the side effect of decking yourself.
Well, like you said, I mean, Magic's easy, right?
Yeah, just put what you want in your hand.
Exactly.
All right, guys, so that was Kess, the Dissident Mage. Now, this deck has been a lot of fun making. Storm is probably my favorite mechanic in all of Magic, and one of the cool things about it is that it's so overpowered that Wizards R&D even went as far as saying that they'll never reprint Storm again, and they even made their own special scaling on a scale of 1 to Storm on whether or not they should reprint certain mechanics.
So basically, on a level of Wonder Storm, how well do you think this deck does in the early game, Bronson?
Well, unfortunately, in the early game, we don't have a lot of answers. We're looking at trying to build a board state as quickly as possible by putting down those mana rocks and getting as many of our enchantments down as possible in the early game. The early game is designed purely for build-up. If we can get Thousand Year Storm or Aria of Flame on the board within turns 3, 4, and 5, then we're looking at being able to close the game out the moment the mid-game hits.
Alrighty. So I guess politicking would be a big part of that.
It is. If you got that aggro player on the field, it's going to be a heavy politic game to see if the other two players can handle the aggro player trying to turn one against the other. One of the big things in this deck is that the reason why we're running Devastation Tide is just in case those other two players aren't having any of your shenaniganizing and any of your politicking, you can go ahead and Dev Tide the entire board and then just start putting your stuff back out.
So the big part about this early game, you're gonna hope it's Commander. Let's all hope that it's probably gonna last longer than 5 turns. If it does, once again on that scale of Wonder Storm, how well do you do in the mid game?
And the mid game is when we start to take off. Turn 6 and on, if we have our enchantments going or we have our enchantments in hand and we're starting to put them down on the board, we're looking at being able to take the game into directions that people just really don't want to go in. One of my biggest tips for this is whenever you're getting ready to play Thousand Year Storm, which is honestly this deck's alpha card, is make sure that you're holding a counterspell and you have enough mana to use it. Because people hear Thousand Year Storm and the first words that are going to come out of their mouth is in response.
Yeah, let's not let that resolve. And for anyone playing against this deck, let's hope that you guys have more than just one counterspell available, because obviously he's gonna, we're gonna be trying keeping a counterspell in hand for that. Anyone else playing this deck is gonna try and have a counterspell for it. So you got to try and have a removal for it, because if not, if that stays on the board, you can guarantee this deck's probably going to take off in a turn or two, right?
The thing that I found out is that if I can untap with Thousand Year Storm on the field, I'm probably going to win the game that turn.
And guys, that is just deadly, okay? So obviously from turn 6 and on is really when this deck starts to take off. What about late game? Does this deck give you any problems with any of those Outlast decks or stuff like that?
Actually, one of the biggest things of those Outlast decks, trying to play against them, comes to this deck's secondary strategy, which is the mill combos. Looking at Expansion Explosion, floating 50 plus mana in your mana pool, and then hitting them with 2 to 3 Expansion Explosion triggers. So if they've got over 100 life, you can blast them with those X spells to just completely destroy them. Or you can just blow their creatures apart that are causing them to gain life while forcing them to mill all the cards in their deck. So then you just say, my favorite words, pass the turn.
That is just deadly. And then how does this deck, handle any kind of mass board wipes or like on the recovery aspect? I noticed you don't have many spells in here. You said you have with Kess, you have a whole 10, creatures in this deck. So you're not too worried about really any board wipes, are you?
The only board wipes I'm concerned about are the ones that are hitting my enchantments and my artifacts.
Yeah, because you don't have a way to really recur those, do you?
No. So when I do see those board wipes coming, I guarantee you one thing, I'm countering it.
All right.
Because the only spells I'm going to counter on the field are spells that directly affect what I'm doing. That's the big thing about playing control in Commander is play control, make it look like you're helping everybody, but only interact with things that are going to directly interfere with your overall strategy.
Okay. So with, the politicking game early on and kind of making it seem like you're not really doing things and then coming out of nowhere, how easy would you say this deck is to run for either new or veteran players?
For new players, this deck is going to give you a lot of problems. You need to know the stack inside and out in order to play a Storm deck.
Then this is actually our second deck, guys, that you probably need to be a little bit more experienced to play. We're going to try and get a deck here, probably the next deck or two, that are going to be easier for you new players, okay, for you to be able to run. Sorry about that interruption.
Oh, that's perfectly fine. When it comes down to overall gameplay, knowing the stack is what's going to be your biggest friend. Because I watch players all the time jump the gun. Because I'll play a spell that's about to storm off, and then they'll play a counter spell. I'll play a counter spell on top of that counter spell, and they'll immediately counter it before Thousand Year Storm resolves. So then I let Thousand Year Storm actually take its spot on the stack, which will be on the top. I have a second counterspell sitting on top of their counterspell to counter that counterspell so that everything else resolves. And this is where you start out countering every other control deck.
So, if someone was going to have an answer to that, what would it have to be? One of those like exiling the stack effects?
Summary Dismissal is probably one of the worst cards for me to come up against in this deck, and that's why I usually will hold open Unwind for that stuff, or even Negate. Because if I see that if they let me build up my stack and I notice that they do have that mana open, I am expecting Summary Dismissal to come out of their hand to say exile the stack. Now, Ashiok's Eraser is good, but however, it only exiles permanents,
Okay.
and so that's not a big problem because we're not doing a whole lot of permanent stuff. And with the enchantment and artifact removal that we can run with bouncing everything, if someone does Ashiok's Eraser, cool thing is go ahead and dev type them. Then your Thousand Year Storm or your Aria Flame will just go ahead and land on your board state anyways.
And that is really deadly. So outside of that, early game and stuff, what would you say this deck's biggest weakness is?
Creature aggro is probably the hardest things to go up against in this deck. It's very hard to take care of those really large creatures or just a numerously large amount of them. That's one of the reasons why I run cards like Empty the Warrens, so that I can put up a massive wall of goblin tokens and just pretty much, if I've got that large 12/12 Galta coming my way, just throw 12 goblins at it.
Oh yeah, and I understand that completely. When we priced this deck, Bronson, I mean, minus the basic lands once again, because you can pick those up at any game store for pennies on the dollar, if not for free. What did this deck total come to?
Well, if I go ahead and I look real quick to what TCG Player has to say about this deck, we are looking at a deck price of $76.37.
And guys, like I said, that's a little bit on the higher end of our budget. You can probably fit a couple of those, changes in the deck and still keep it in budget. But cards that are really going to make this thing tick are probably going to push over that budget, which is where having a little bit of leeway is a good idea when you're going to make those upgrades.
It is. If you're looking to buy this deck as a starter deck or as just a cheap deck to get a hold of to be competitive at your local game store, in my experience at our local game store, this deck has caused a lot of problems to a lot of people, and they've even went as far as asking me to not play it again at the game store because of just how interactive it is and how difficult it is to take care of in the mid and late game.
And I've noticed that, especially in a lot of competitive formats or even those laid-back formats that are playing higher tier decks, a lot of them aren't very interactive with each other. And this is kind of on the opposite end of that scale. Most of those decks are kind of wanting to sit back, do their own thing, and build. And this deck is kind of not really doing that, is it?
This deck is extremely interactive. What your opponents are playing is going to matter because you have to be watching. You have to be very cognitive of what's going on because you need to know. The thing about control is that your personal vigilance is going to be what wins you the game. Because missing that one thing where you were texting on your phone or you were, looking at Facebook or you were just off doing your own thing, and then someone goes, I play this spell, and then you just let it resolve, and then you realize what happened.
That is one of the biggest mistakes any Magic player can make, guys. And, for this deck, that's definitely a big mistake. I mean, if you're playing against this deck, you want to pay attention as to what's happening, and you better hope you know your cards because that's going to cause problems at the table if not.
Oh, yeah. Now, one of the biggest things about this deck, though, is once it starts to trigger, your standard everyday run-of-the-mill counterspell is not going to mean anything to this deck because it's going to counter the first spell, but Thousand Year Storm or even countering Grape Shot itself, it doesn't matter. They're on cast triggers.
Yes,
so you have to exile the stack in order to get rid of those problems. And with Commander being a singleton format, there's only going to ever be one Serum Denial in any deck.
Yes, you're exactly right. So looking at everything, Bronson, I like this deck. I like watching it play. It's a lot of fun. I know you have fun playing this deck. I guess we can definitely say that this deck is Bargain Bin approved. So guys, we're going to see you guys in the Bargain Bin next time.
Yay, cake!
Oh yeah.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.